Weiss struggled to contain her frustration when the headmaster and his deputy were allowed in, but they were denied. Her eyes narrowed into angry slits as she stared at the doctor who probably didn't deserve her temper, but certainly was going to receive it. This is bullshit! That is, if Yang hadn't already beaten her to it. We've been waiting all day for him to wake up. Then you pretend he hasn't so the headmaster can see him first? I agree, Pyrrha said, stood beside Ruby and her own team. Surely it could not hurt to let him see a friendly face after his ordeal. Ruby nodded her head furiously, and for once, actually managed to look intimidated as she glared at the doctor with sharp, silver eyes. Now, the faunus laughed. This wasn't exactly my choice. Besides, there are more things we ought to speak of before I let you in to see your teammate. You want to help him recover, don't you? It was a distraction. Weiss knew that, but it didn't stop her freezing up. Is he okay? She asked. Is something wrong? He lives, and will continue to live. The drugs in his system will still affect him, however, and it would be prudent for you to know how to take care of him. Sunair led them to a nearby medical office and held the door open for them to enter. Once the 3 members of the team were inside, she looked ready to close it, but sighed and gestured for Team Ruben to enter as well. You would just eavesdrop if I didn't, she explained. The more the merrier in this regard as well, since it will be up to you to ensure his continued recovery. We'll do what we can, Ruby said and settled into a plastic seat. The rest of them took positions wherever they could, but Weiss felt far too anxious to sit down. She stood by the door instead, arms crossed beneath her breast. The doctor took one look at them and decided patience wasn't going to be a strong point of theirs. Your team leader looks as though he will make a full recovery. The initial trauma is healing, and I've given him what I can to ease the pain. The problem will come from the after effects of this ordeal, particularly the narcotic-related aspects. He's going to go through withdrawal? Weiss asked. Perhaps. It's difficult to say. He was subjugated to far more than he should have, and with the strength of the overdose. It is possible his system might have been too overwhelmed to actually form an addiction. Even if he hasn't, there's still the fact much of it still swims around inside of him. He is almost certainly going to crash in the coming days, and that might not be pretty. What should we do if he does? What would it look like? Contact me immediately. This goes for you all, no matter where he is or what you're doing. Someone is to stay with him and make sure he doesn't go anywhere or do anything, but another must come and get me. As for the symptoms, it is possible he might suffer seizures and fits. He shouldn't, the woman quickly added when it looked like they might panic. But he might. I simply want you to be aware of the possibility. I shall provide instructions of what to do. I will send the various scenarios to your scroll, but your best bet is to find me or another teacher as soon as possible. Every member of our staff here is trained in at least basic first aid. We can do that. Yang had already pulled out her scroll and was going through the information. What else? Is there more? Anything further you'll find on there, the doctor said. There are a few things I wanted to ask, however. They relate to his health. Weiss's brow furrowed as worry wormed its way under her skin. This woman was the doctor, not them. So what is it she could be asking? It didn't bode well, if the serious look on her face was any indication. I never had a chance to properly notice before, but with the extent of his injuries, I decided to run more tests on his body. Miss Schnee, can you tell me what your partner eats in an average day? Not much. For breakfast he has maybe half a bowl of porridge, and sometimes an apple, if I can force it down him. I don't think I've ever seen him eat a full meal. Have any of you? Weiss looked around, almost desperately, but not a single one of them disagreed. I feared as much. His weight is far below what I expect of someone his age and size, and his body didn't respond well to the chemicals, or fighting them off. I'm afraid your teammate suffers from malnutrition. It's gotten to the point where it's becoming a problem, particularly because it has inhibited his body's ability to metabolize the drugs in his system. To put it bluntly, his low body weight made this episode a whole lot worse. The diagnosis was like a blow to her stomach, and for a moment, she struggled to breathe. That was followed by a rush of guilt, made all the worse because of the time she could remember thinking he wasn't eating enough. She always tried to make him eat more, but she'd given up after a while. If she only pushed, if she only noticed sooner and done something. I was always focused on his injuries before. I never thought to check his weight. Jaune said, "I'll admit that a part of me believes he distracted me on purpose so that I wouldn't." "That's just like him," Blake said. "He does that whenever he doesn't want to talk about something, when he doesn't want you to worry." I must ask, have any of you noticed any other symptoms? Anything unusual, or that might seem out of place for someone a typical person his age? "Well, he's lazy," Yang said. "He sleeps all the time." The blonde's face scrunched up a moment later. "Or, well, he used to. Now that I think about it, I can't remember the last time he took one of his naps. It used to be every second he could get one," Ruby said. "You're right though. I've not seen him fall asleep in class or the hallway for weeks." Exhausting and lack of energy are common symptoms of malnutrition, the doctor said. Since he's not getting the nutrients and calorie he requires, his body is trying to save energy by resting and reducing the amount of strenuous activity he does. "You said this behavior stopped?" "Yeah," Yang said. I guess, it was around the time the whole thing with the warehouse. Before then, Blake said guiltily. He and I were scouting them in the evenings. We didn't get into combat, but I think it was around then that he stopped taking naps. I'm afraid that isn't necessarily a good sign. His body had been putting itself into shutdown because it needs the rest. By skipping out on that, he's just ignoring the symptoms and placing his body in peril. Why did her head fall back against the door? That idiot. It was just like him, wasn't it? He never told them when something was wrong. Whether he did it because he didn't think there was anything wrong, or because he didn't want to bother them. Weiss wasn't sure. It would change though. She would ensure that. There was never really any time for rest after that either, Yang said. We went straight from fighting against the White Fang to preparing for the dance, and then we headed off on that mission. I know he slept, but I'm fairly sure I never saw him get any extra sleep. He barely sleeps a full night anyway, Blake interrupted. He wakes up at least once almost every night, and when he sleeps, it's not exactly what I'd call restful. The girl reached up to tap 2 fingers between her eyes. Even when it's dark, I can still see perfectly. He had nightmares. Why had he never... Of course. Just another thing he didn't want to bother them with. Weiss's eyes drifted shut as she tried to ignore the distress she felt deep inside. This was her partner, the person whose back she was supposed to watch. Could she even really claim that when she missed all of this? Had she been swept up in a fantasy and falling for him and her feelings? That? She never noticed how much he needed their help. No. She shook her head and scowled. This wasn't the time to be thinking about herself. How pathetic was she? He needed their support, not for her to wallow in self-pity. Now was the time for action. She forced her eyes open and looked at the doctor. "Tell us what we need to do," she said. "We'll do whatever is necessary." "I have a dietary plan for him." Jaune handed over a pamphlet to her. She flicked through it idly and noted the various suggestions and portion sizes. It also claimed the staff working at the cafeteria had been made aware and would help Jaune with it. He wouldn't like it. She could already tell. Well, a shame for him. He'll follow it, Weiss promised. "I'll make sure he eats. I won't let him out of my sight at lunch hour. Should he have snacks as well? Can you force them down him? I shall pry his jaws open if I have to," Weiss threatened. "We'll help. Right, Blake?" Yang laughed. The fauness nodded her head once, eyes determined. The doctor chuckled. In that case, then yes. Snacks could be good for him, between every meal if possible. His rest is another thing he needs to watch out for. He should get a decent sleep wherever possible, and while he recovers, He should be encouraged to take any naps he wants. I'll handle that, Yang threatened. Leave that one to me and Zui. We're pretty much free from lessons for the next few weeks anyway, what with most people being on missions and things. If we break these tasks up between us, we'll be able to keep an eye on him all day. Good idea, Blake said. I will accompany him during the day and make sure he doesn't do anything that might make his condition worse. I'll also watch in case he has an adverse reaction after all those drugs. I can also use my eyes to watch him at night, make sure he's okay. I will help during the day as well, of course. We all will. Weiss smiled and nodded to her teammates. We'll make this work. With how certain you all sound, I feel confident of it, Jaune said. He's going to have regular checkups with me, and I suppose I don't need to put out how he's probably going to try and skip those. He won't, Weiss promised. We shall help where we can, Ren said, even if it's just in helping him to occupy his attention or filling in for one of you. Definitely, Ruby agreed. Jaune's my friend too, so I'm going to help with this. Just give me something to do, whatever you need. We will, sis. Don't worry. Weiss watched them discuss how they'd all help. As she did, the worry she felt began to dwindle, replaced with something altogether different. It was almost amusing to think back on their errant team leader, how they dismissed him and how frustrated he'd been. Things were different now, yet in some ways, he'd never lose that ability to irritate her. Back then, it was because he did too little. Now, it was because he did too much. There's never any balance with you, is there? No matter. I'd like to see you elude the 7 of us. I'm glad to see you all so determined, Jaune said. The headmaster ought to be finished now, so you'll be careful with him. You can go in and see the patient. The doctor might as well have told them there was a bomb in the room for how fast they moved. Yang and Ruby hit the door first and instantly got stuck in it. Blake hovered behind, but there was no semblance of patience in the way she twitched and frowned. Weiss made sure to follow and pause when a hand fell on her shoulder. May I have a word in private? The doctor asked. The heiress nodded, watching the others leave and push their way into the room besides this one. Once they were alone, the doctor sat back down. I'd like to start by saying your partner can and will make a full recovery from his physical injuries. I don't want to worry you about that. The relief she felt was palpable, and her shoulders relaxed. Thank you. I promise we'll follow your instructions to the letter. Oh, I have no doubt about that. The doctor chuckled. I know you're all dedicated, and I'll do my best to help his recovery as well. After all, how can I play with my favorite patient if he's ill? He has such a high threshold. I'll have to work even harder to draw out a reaction that makes it worth all the effort. The bushy tail behind the woman began to wag happily. Weiss coughed awkwardly. Ah, sorry. The faunus reached behind her to drag her tail down beneath the table with a sheepish smile. What I wanted to say is that so long as he receives treatment, the issue of his malnutrition will go away in time. But, Weiss asked, but, it won't solve the underlying issue which caused it in the first place, Jaune said. Let me be clear on one thing. Malnutrition is a condition. It can come about as a result of many other problems, but I very much doubt an inability to access food is one of them. Jaune, Weiss paused. It felt like a betrayal to reveal anything they knew about him, but at the same time, it was to save his life. She bit her lip for a few moments. In the end, however, she spoke. We had a suspicion he might be dealing with some mental issues, she said. Depression, anxiety. We're not sure, but his parents said they knew something changed in him, or that something was wrong. Mental illness is a wide-ranging subject, but there are plenty of them that can lead to a loss of appetite. It's possible that's the problem. We're trying to help. Weiss rushed her words out. We've already decided to stick with him, and things have been better since Yang brought her father's dog here. He's a service dog and spends lots of time with him, which might as well be proof of some underlying issue. The doctor sighed. It said some animals can smell distress, even illness. I won't lie and claim I'm a psychologist. Miss Schnee, I'm a doctor by trade and a surgeon by hobby. I will send a message to Dr. Oblek, however. He'll be looking after your partner in some sessions while he recovers. Just make sure there aren't any lingering issues he has from his ordeal. I'll ask him to look out for signs of mental illness as well. If he finds any, I shall let you know." "Is that legal?" Weiss asked worriedly. "Are you allowed to let me know?" "It's unethical, perhaps, but in his best interest for now." The faunus shrugged. "Besides, you all signed a rather comprehensive contract when you joined Beacon. Some of it indicates that I have the freedom to do whatever I feel is best, without taking all legal safeties. It's to allow me to administrate immediate treatment, since your injuries are typically more troublesome than what the general populace suffers." The woman's bushy tail pushed its way out from under the desk and began to sway left and right again. "I'll admit, it does allow me some benefits too. And now I'm not so sure I can ever blame Jaune for trying to avoid this woman so often." The two teachers were forced to hide their smiles when the students surged around them and towards their wounded teammate. At any other time, she might have rebuked them for their haste, but she would let that go for now. You can't blame them for caring. Not when it was a virtue they did their best to encourage. What troubled her most, how easily he returned it. His team were worried for him, and that made sense. But Mr. Ark showed concern for them in return. Concern he should not have been capable of feeling, considering the ordeal he'd been through. That alone was enough to make her blood boil. One of her pupils, one of her students, had been tortured by some monster. It was bad enough they faced Grim, but at least she could protect them from the threat until they were prepared for it. To imagine someone so young beaten for information, and then to be drugged when they would not surrender it. She wondered if she would have held, had it been her in the situation. She was no stranger to combat, but not once had she been captured by the enemy. It hardly helped that he reacted with vague indifference at best. He was more concerned about what he might have done to his friends in a drug-induced rage. She had prepared herself for tears, pain, accusations, or fury, and she thought each of those would have hurt. His casual acceptance was far worse. If the man responsible for it was still alive, then she might have something to say about rectifying that state of affairs. Speaking of, "You told him Torchwick's died in the train crash." "I did," Osmond said. "We both know that isn't true." But he does not. "I'm sure you saw the shock on his face as clear as I. It's obvious he does not remember what occurred on that train, or after." Osmond sighed, and for once looked every one of his years. Mr. Ark was troubled enough by the threat he might have harmed his friends. The thought of losing control. I saw no need to trouble him over it. "You believe him when he said he wasn't aware then?" "I could see no lies in his eyes," Osmond said. "How about you?" Galinda shook her head. His surprise, no, his shock, seemed honest. "I don't think he's aware of it," she said, "but I doubt he would lose any sleep over it if he knew. He has killed before, after all, and there's no denying Torchwick deserved it after what he did. Perhaps not, but thanks to Miss Belladonna's discovery, we now have proof Torchwick was here on the instructions of a third party. I would not wish their attention drawn on to Mr. Ark. Not at the best of times, and certainly not with him at his weakest." Osmond smiled. "Let them focus their efforts against us instead." Galinda nodded her head, content to agree. Whoever this queen was, she clearly intended for Torchwick to cause this accident. Perhaps not as early as he did, but the intent was still there. They might feel quite frustrated to see their plan thwarted, and her student was weak for now. She would not let this deceit go. "Will we go off the story you sent to the media?" she asked. "Indeed. Roman Torchwick died in an accident of his own making. It was unfortunate, if not unpredictable end." Well, that was one way to put it. She just wished the image of him would leave her mind. His lifeless green eyes, open wide in fear, mouth set to scream, his throat slit from ear to ear. I understand. She said, I just hope you know what you're doing. As do I, Galinda. As do I.